I mean, just look around your workplace right now. Or, think about your industry, your friend groups, even the group chats you're in.
Yeah, those invisible webs connecting everyone.
Exactly. And ask yourself, can you truly consciously engineer the human network around you to do your bidding? Like, can you meticulously build connections and redirect the flow of power the same way a mechanic builds an engine?
Right.
Or is the very idea that you can control human connections just this dangerous, arrogant delusion that's inevitably going to blow up in your face?
Well, that right there, that is really the defining question of our modern era. I
Right.
mean, we are living in a time where the network has completely replaced traditional markets and, rigid hierarchies
Mm.
as the dominant metaphor for how society functions.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet, most of us have absolutely no idea how these networks actually operate beneath the surface. We're just flying blind.
We really are. And so that is our mission for this deep dive. We are taking a massive stack of source material today to evaluate the transformative power of network dynamics.
Yeah, specifically looking at it as a weapon for hierarchical leverage.
Right. And we've got a lot to unpack. We have academic research on network theory from Clegg and his colleagues. We're pulling in complex systems theory and risk analysis from Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Which is always a wild ride.
Always. Plus, we've got foundational behavioral psychology from Robert Cialdini and Daniel Kahneman. We're looking at cognitive blind spot analysis from Charlie Munger, and of course, the historical laws of power laid out by Robert Greene.
So to really make sense of all this, I think we need to introduce the conceptual battle that's essentially raging across all of these different sources.
Yeah, let's set the stage.
Right. So we can think of it as a fight between two theoretical avatars. On one side of the ring, we have what we'll call the strategic architect.
Okay, the architect. So I picture someone like standing over a giant blueprint of the office, literally drawing lines between desks.
That is the exact mindset, yeah. The strategic architect firmly believes that human networks can be perfectly mapped. Like, they look at the data, the communication flows, the organizational charts, and they genuinely believe they can identify what sociologists call structural holes.
Structural holes, so meaning gaps in the network.
Exactly. Gaps where two groups aren't talking. And the architect's entire philosophy is that if you can spot those gaps, well, you can fill them with your own value creation, forge total dependency, and basically achieve top-down control.
Right.
It's a highly mechanical, very cold view of humanity.
Yeah, it treats people like gears. But then, standing in the opposite corner of the ring, staring down the architect, we have our second avatar, right? The cynical auditor.
The architect.
And the auditor looks at that pristine blueprint and just laughs because they argue that human networks are fundamentally emergent, chaotic systems. They're not circuits at all.
Not even close.
They're governed by the ancient tribal wetware of the human brain. So to the auditor, social engineering is just a dangerous myth. It's an illusion of control that inevitably leads to systemic, catastrophic blowback.
It's the ultimate battle, really.
Mm-hmm.
You have rigid, top-down design clashing with uncontrollable bottom-up complexity. And what's so fascinating is that both sides are pulling from hard data to prove their point.
They are. And
Okay.
so here is our promise to you, the listener, for this deep dive. By the end of this conversation, you're going to understand how to actually navigate these systems in your own life.
You really will.
We're going to uncover exactly where the fatal single point of failure lies for anyone who tries to play the architect. And perhaps most surprisingly, we're going to reveal how something called strategic silence acts as the ultimate defense mechanism against a network-wide collapse.
It's a journey that really forces us to look at the invisible and, frankly, often manipulative strings that govern our daily interactions.
So let's dive right in. Let's start by getting inside the head of the strategic architect. Like, how does this person actually view the matrix of human organization?
Well, when the architect looks at a crowded room or, a massive corporate division, they don't see a chaotic, noisy gathering of individuals with feelings and bad days.
Right. They don't see the messiness.
No, they see nodes, they see edges, and most importantly, they see those structural holes we mentioned. To understand that mindset, we have to look at the research from Clegg and his co-authors.
On the transformative power of network dynamics.
Exactly. They do this great job of defining what a network form of organization actually is, historically speaking. Because for a long time, we really only had two ways of organizing people at scale.
Markets and hierarchies, right?
Yes. We had markets, which are purely transactional. You give me $1, I give you a loaf of bread, and we never have to speak again.
Very clean.
Super clean. And then we had hierarchies, like a traditional military unit or an assembly line factory. And those rely on rigid, legitimate organizational authority to dictate every single move and resolve disputes.
The boss says jump, you jump, there's no debate.
Exactly. But networks are a completely different beast. A network organization is defined as a collection of actors engaged in repeated, enduring exchange relations without a formal, overarching authority dictating every single move.
It's decentralized.
It's totally decentralized.
But, and this is key, decentralized does not mean equal, right? Just because there isn't a dictator doesn't mean power isn't concentrating somewhere in that web.
Oh, that is a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
Castells, who is a really foundational figure in this network literature, he talks about the structural position of what he calls the switcher.
The switcher, okay.
Yeah, so even in a completely decentralized web, there are certain nodes, certain people that have the ultimate power to connect or disconnect different components of the network.
Ah, I see.
So the architect looks at a landscape, and their entire strategy is basically, I need to become that switcher.
Okay, so let's make this really concrete for you listening. How do they actually do that in real life? We keep mentioning structural holes. What does that actually look like in the real world?
Sure. Think of a structural hole as a vacuum between two distinct, isolated clusters in a network. So let's use a modern corporate example.
Let's do it.
Imagine a massive tech company. You have the engineering department on one side. They speak in code. Their culture is super introverted. They care deeply about product stability.
Makes sense.
Then, on the totally opposite side, you have the marketing department. They speak in narratives. Their culture is highly extroverted. They only care about growth metrics and hype.
Two completely different worlds.
Exactly. These two groups have entirely different languages and goals, and because of that, they barely speak to each other. That communication gap right there between them, that is a structural hole.
And the strategic architect, they spot that gap.
Yes. They see the hole, and they position themselves directly in the middle of it. So they learn just enough engineering jargon to talk to the devs, and just enough marketing speak to vibe with the sales team.
Oh, that's clever.
Right? By controlling the flow of information or resources between those two isolated groups, which the academic literature calls bridging social capital, the architect creates immense hierarchical leverage.
Because they become the indispensable translator.
Exactly.
Neither group can function without the architect transferring the resources. I mean, if the architect goes on vacation, the engineers literally don't know what to build, and the marketers don't know what to sell.
The whole thing grinds to a halt.
Yeah. Which makes me think immediately of Robert Greene's laws of power. Because his core strategy for achieving ultimate control isn't necessarily having the biggest, flashiest title, it's making others completely dependent on you.
Oh, Greene explicitly details this. He calls it the secret intelligence tactic. He brings up the historical example of the French politician and diplomat Talleyrand. Talleyrand was just a master at worming secrets out of people in polite conversation.
He really was.
And by doing that, he effectively made himself the central hub as all French political intelligence.
But how did he actually do it, though? Because if you just walk up to a powerful person at a party and say, hey, tell me your deepest secrets, they're going to shut down instantly.
Oh, for sure. No, Talleyrand used what Greene describes as a transparent veil of insinuations.
Which means what, exactly?
It means he would casually float a slightly provocative or ambiguous statement at a dinner party and then just sit back and watch how people reacted. But his real genius was his demeanor.
He didn't dominate the room.
Not at all. Talleyrand would actively suppress his own personality in the conversation. He would play the attentive, slightly passive listener. He made others feel so comfortable and so intensely heard that they would just talk endlessly about themselves.
People do love to talk about themselves.
They really do.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, they inadvertently revealed their true intentions, their hidden plans, and their personal weaknesses.
He basically became a human vacuum for information, the ultimate switcher.
Precisely. By holding all the secrets and knowing exactly how the different aristocratic factions truly felt about each other, who hated who was bro-cowed. Talleyrand naturally positioned himself in the structural holes of French politics.
Because nobody else had the full picture.
Right. He sealed his fate with the powerful, because he held information that they simply couldn't afford to have broadcast. As Greene points out, when you engineer this kind of informational dependency, getting rid of you becomes incredibly dangerous for the people in power.
Oh, absolutely.
If Talleyrand were removed or imprisoned, all sorts of delicate interdependencies and massive secrets would just unravel overnight.
So the architect uses information and strategic positioning to bridge the structural holes, but it's not just about, data routing. They also use deeply ingrained psychological tools to maneuver the nodes of human beings into their engineered web.
They absolutely do.
And I want to bring in Robert Cialdini's work on influence here because it explains the exact mechanics of how you get people to voluntarily walk into these structural traps.
Cialdini is absolutely fundamental to the architect's playbook. His work really focuses on the mechanistic, unthinking manner in which our automatic behavior patterns occur.
The automatic pilot.
Right, we all have these psychological trigger features built into us. The architect essentially operates like a mimic in nature. You know how certain fireflies will flash the mating signal of a completely different species, lure the male in, and then eat him?
It's terrifying, but yes, I know what you're talking about.
But the architect does the exact same thing psychologically. Yeah. They cressy the trigger features of human behavior to trick us into playing the right behavior tapes at the wrong time.
And a brilliant example Cialdini gives of this is the rejection then retreat sequence.
Ooh, that is a devious one.
It really is. It's a psychological one-two punch that combines the human rule of reciprocity with the perceptual contrast principle. And the way it works is, let's say you want someone to agree to a specific request, but instead of just asking for it, you start by making a massive, extreme request that is absolutely guaranteed to be rejected.
A ridiculous request.
Totally ridiculous. And when they say no, as you know they will, you sigh, act a little defeated, and then retreat to your smaller request, which was your actual goal all along.
And the psychological machinery that triggers in the victim's mind when you do that is just overwhelming.
Exactly. Because first, the perceptual contrast principle kicks in. Because they just anchored their brain to this massive, insane request, your smaller request suddenly looks incredibly trivial by comparison.
Right.
But more importantly, the reciprocity rule kicks in. The other person feels like you have just made a social concession to them by backing down.
They feel guilty almost.
Yes. So human wetware dictates that they feel socially obligated to reciprocate by agreeing to your smaller request.
It's a fearsomely powerful force. And Cialdini argues that this engineered psychological sequence is literally the only plausible explanation for one of the biggest political blunders in American history.
Watergate.
Yes, the Watergate break-in.
Because when you look at Watergate objectively, the plan was incredibly stupid. I mean, why would anyone agree to it?
That's the exact mystery Cialdini solves.
Right.
Because G. Gordon Liddy, the guy who organized the break-in, didn't just walk into the room and pitch a simple office burglary. Liddy's initial proposal to the re-election committee was a wildly expensive, multi-million-dollar, incredibly dangerous espionage program.
It was like a Bond movie villain plot.
Literally. It involved specialized mugging squads, kidnapping political opponents, and using prostitutes on a yacht to blackmail Democrats.
Which is insane. Kidnapping in yachts.
Completely insane. So obviously the committee immediately rejected it. They were like, get out of here. So Liddy waited and then came back later with a scaled-down $500,000 plan.
Still rejected.
Still rejected. Finally, he comes back a third time and retreats to this bare-bones $250,000 plan that just involves breaking into the Watergate offices to plant some bugs.
And suddenly, compared to kidnapping and blackmail yachts, a simple burglary seems perfectly reasonable.
Yes. The committee felt relief. They felt Liddy had made massive concessions to them, so they reciprocated. They approved the bugging. As Jeb Stuart Magruder, one of the committee members, said later, he literally said, "How could we have been so stupid?"
But the point is, they weren't necessarily stupid. They were engineered. They were nodes being aggressively maneuvered by a strategic architect using the rejection then retreat mimicry.
Exactly.
And Robert Greene adds another layer to this kind of maneuvering, which is exploiting emotional voids.
Well, this is huge.
Because the architect isn't just looking for organizational gaps in an org chart. They are looking for psychological gaps in you. Greene notes that people who are insecure or unhappy are absolute suckers for any kind of social validation.
Oh, for sure.
All the architect has to do is observe someone, find their hidden insecurity, and then subtly make them feel better about their taste or their social standing or their intelligence. Once that emotional structural hole is filled by the architect, the fish is hooked.
And they can reel them in again and again.
Okay, let's pause and synthesize this because this is heavy. The architect views society like a giant disconnected circuit board. They scan the board, they find the broken connection, the structural hole, they solder themselves right into the middle of it, and suddenly all the electricity has to flow through them.
Right?
They use Talleyrand's secret gathering techniques to hoard the data, and they use Cialdini's psychological mimicry, like rejection then retreat, to ensure the connection holds. That sounds flawless.
It's us.
But humans aren't circuits. We are incredibly messy. We have egos, we hold irrational grudges, and we occasionally act entirely against our own self-interest.
Which perfectly brings us to the cynical auditor's rebuttal. Because the auditor looks at the architect's pristine, highly engineered circuit board, looks at all the carefully planned psychological traps, and essentially says, you were completely delusional.
Yeah.
Because human beings are not static nodes on a graph. They are complex, emergent systems governed by unpredictable, tribal wetware.
Hold on, I'm kind of confused here. Because 10 minutes ago you said Clegg's research proves we can map these networks by finding structural holes and acting as the switcher. Is Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who champions this auditor perspective, saying Clegg is completely wrong?
No.
Or are they just talking past each other? How can both be true?
That is the crux of the entire debate right there. Taleb isn't saying the structural holes don't exist in a static snapshot of time. Like if you take a picture of a network, the holes are there.
Okay.
What he's saying is at the very moment you try to interact with that map, the map changes. He introduces the concept of Kleisel opacity and the curse of dimensionality to explain why the architect's arrogance is fatal.
The curse of dimensionality.
Right. When you are dealing with human groups, you simply cannot take the logic of a small group and scale it up to a massive network. Adding even one more node to a group doesn't just add a simple linear complication, it multiplies the complexity exponentially.
Walk me through the math on that. Why is it exponential and not just additive?
Okay, think about a group of 3 people, right? There are only 3 potential one-on-one relationships to manage in that group.
A to B, B to C, A to C. Simple.
Simple. Now, if you add a 4th person, you don't just add one more relationship line. You now have 6 potential relationship lines.
Oh, I see.
Right, and the math scales violently. By the time you reach a group of just 100 people, there are nearly 5,000 hidden relationship lines.
Wow. Okay, that is a massive jump.
It is. Now, Taleb points out that a group of 10 is mathematically a completely different animal than a group of 395,000.
Oh.
It is as different as a book is from a towering office building. The higher the dimension, meaning the more people involved, the higher the number of possible interactions.
So it just becomes impossible to track.
Exactly. It becomes disproportionately difficult to understand the macro behavior from the micro data. If you have a small random error in your mapping, a single additional dimension might multiply the complexity of that error 1 billion times over.
Oh, wow.
You physically cannot track how a rumor, a grudge, or a piece of leaked information will travel through millions of invisible shifting lines. That is causal opacity. You cannot reverse engineer these complex evolutionary forces.
So the architect thinks they can just lay a map on the table and follow it, but the auditor says, no, the map is vibrating, mutating, and changing 1 billion times a second.
Yes.
And the actual material the network is made of, the human beings, is incredibly volatile. This is what we mean by wetware. It's primal, it's biological. And Cialdini's recount of the Sharif experiment is terrifyingly relevant to this exact point.
Oh, the Sharif experiment,
Yeah.
often called the Robbers Cave experiment. This is basically a foundational text for the auditor's worldview.
It's wild. So the researchers, led by Muzaffar Sharif, wanted to see how quickly they could manufacture cross-group hatred among completely normal people. Right. They took a group of well-adjusted, normal boys at a summer camp. And, as Cialdini notes, the recipe for generating intense tribal hostility was shockingly simple.
They didn't have to brainwash them or feed them propaganda or anything.
Not at all. All they did was separate the boys into 2 distinct cabins. The Eagles and the Rattlers.
Just gave them names.
Just gave them names. Just drawing an arbitrary line and letting them sit for a while in their own juices was enough to start the us versus them mentality.
That's all it took, just separating them physically. And then step 2 was mixing them together over the flame of continued competition.
Right.
They introduced a series of competitive games. You know, tug of war, baseball, tent pitching. Suddenly you had cross-group hatred at a rolling boil. Name-calling escalated to cabin raiding, burning each other's flags, and actual physical brawls.
These were polite boys.
Normal polite boys turned into vicious tribal warriors in a matter of days.
But the truly fascinating part is what happened when the researchers tried to engineer the network back to normal.
Yes, the contact approach. They tried bringing the hostile bands together for pleasant, non-competitive activities. They showed the movies together. They had them eat at the same dining hall.
So the architect would say, look, I'm bridging the structural hole with pleasant resources. It should fix it.
But it was disastrous. The picnics produced massive food fights. The dining hall lines degenerated into shoving matches. The researchers literally worried they had created a Frankenstein monster they could no longer control.
It just shows how easily human wetware defaults to deep-seated tribalism. You cannot just engineer them back together with a picnic and a smile.
No, you can't.
And human groups protect their tribal boundaries fiercely. Look at initiation rites. For centuries, authorities have tried to ban hazing in tribal societies, in military units, and in college fraternities. They have tried threats, legal action, massive bribes. None of it works.
Because, as Cialdini explains, these hazing practices are phenomenally resilient. They simply will not die. When the authority watches closely, the harsher trials just move underground.
But why?
Because the beatings, the cold nights, the psychological humiliations, they aren't just random acts of sadism. They are vital acts of group survival.
Wait, how does suffering help the group survive?
Studies of tribal cultures worldwide show that those with the most dramatic, stringent, and painful initiation ceremonies have the greatest group solidarity. The severity of the initiation physically heightens the newcomer's commitment to the group.
Oh, so if I suffer terribly to join something, I have to convince myself it was incredibly valuable to justify the pain I just went through.
Exactly. Groups instinctively know this. They will violently oppose all attempts by an architect or an authority figure to eliminate this crucial link to their tribal strength. You just can't regulate away human nature.
So the network has its own immune system against being engineered. That's fascinating. And Green's laws highlight another uncontrollable variable that wrecks the architect's plans, which is the social force.
The social force. Yes. This is our profound, almost biological susceptibility to the moods and emotions of those around us. Green points out that humans unconsciously imitate the emotions and dominance cues of others.
Like catching a yawn.
Exactly like that, but with emotions. If we're in a group, we feel what others feel on a subverbal level. If someone is intensely tense, our heart rate spikes. If someone is laughing, we relax.
And Daniel Kahneman calls this out too, in the context of what he brilliantly terms availability cascades.
Such a great concept.
It really is. It means an architect's beautifully engineered corporate plan can be completely hijacked in an afternoon because human emotions go viral. Imagine a minor, relatively harmless corporate policy change. Maybe they tweak the remote work days.
Sure, happens all the time.
Right. It catches the attention of a few vocal people. They become emotionally aroused. They post a rant in the company Slack channel. The emotional contagion spreads, which produces greater concern among people who didn't even care originally. And suddenly you have a self-sustaining chain reaction.
And Kahneman notes that availability entrepreneurs, people who thrive on drama or political maneuvering, might try to stoke the flames. But very quickly, it overrides any logical top-down plan. The panic or outrage completely resets the entire company's priorities.
The architect is left holding a useless blueprint while the building literally burns down around them.
Which is such a common occurrence.
It is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the cynical auditor asks a really damning question. What happens when these interventionistas, as Taleb calls them, try to engineer systems they don't truly understand? What happens when they ignore the math of causal opacity and the reality of the wetware?
Well, Taleb introduces a concept here that is absolutely vital. He calls it the Bob Rubin trade.
The Bob Rubin trade. Explain that.
It is the ultimate indictment of the strategic architect. It's named after Robert Rubin, the former Treasury Secretary and banking executive. The concept describes a situation where engineers or bankers or policymakers manipulate a complex system and take the steady profits of their manipulation while things are going smoothly.
So they get the bonuses, the promotions, the magazine covers.
Right. They look like absolute geniuses for a few years. But because they have built a fragile, highly engineered system that completely ignores the chaotic wetware and the hidden exponential risks we talked about, it inevitably blows up.
It's mathematically guaranteed to fail.
It is mathematically guaranteed. And when it does violently collapse, the engineer invokes the Black Swan defense.
Oh, I hate this defense.
They throw up their hands and say, nobody could have seen this coming. It was a 1 in a million unprecedented event, and then they transfer the catastrophic cost of the failure to the network.
The taxpayers, the employees, the shareholders.
Exactly. While entirely keeping their past income and bonuses.
Because they have no skin in the game.
None.
Yeah.
Taleb argues that you should not mess with a complex system if the results are fraught with uncertainty and the downside doesn't directly affect the interventionist. Systems only truly learn and become robust by filtering out mistakes. But that filtering process requires the people making the mistakes to bear the financial or reputational cost.
Right. If you don't feel a pain, you don't learn the lesson.
Without skin in the game, the architect just builds up systemic imbalances until the system violently self-repairs through a catastrophic collapse.
And Charlie Munger gives an unbelievable, tragic example of how social engineering goes horribly wrong due to what he calls incentive-caused bias. He shows that people will game literally any system you engineer if the incentives aren't aligned with reality.
Oh, the McDonnell-Douglas test.
Yes, the McDonnell-Douglas airliner evacuation test. It is a perfect illustration of the wetware fighting the blueprint.
It really is.
So the government engineers a rule. An airliner must be fully evacuated in a very short amount of time to be certified as safe for the public. And the government adds a caveat: the test must be realistic, meaning you can't just use a cabin full of 20-year-old Olympic athletes. You have to use a realistic demographic slice of the population, including elderly people.
Okay, so the architect has laid down the metrics, they engineered the rule. How does the corporation respond to this engineered rule?
They respond by prioritizing the metric over human reality. They schedule the evacuation test in a darkened hangar to simulate an emergency. They fill the plane with elderly test subjects to meet the demographic requirement. But the passenger cabin is 20 feet in the air, and they're using flimsy rubber evacuation chutes.
It's a disaster waiting to happen.
They run the morning test, and predictably, it is chaos. People are panicking. It results in 20 serious injuries among the elderly subjects, and they completely fail the time limit.
Now, a rational system would stop there, right?
Yeah.
And say, okay, we need to redesign the plane's exit.
Exactly. But an engineered system driven by incentives doesn't care about reality. It cares about passing the test. So what do?
They run it again.
They run the exact same test again that afternoon. And it results in 20 more serious injuries, including a horrific case of permanent paralysis. They were just trying to game the engineered metric to get their certification. The human cost was devastating because the top-down system design completely ignored the psychological and physical reality of the nodes, the people it was trying to control.
It is just a profound failure of empathy and systems thinking.
It really is. So if the auditor is right, the architect isn't playing a clean game of chess. They are trying to play chess where the pieces have their own anxieties, tribal hatreds, hidden incentives, and occasionally just decide to set the board on fire.
That is a perfect, terrifying way to visualize it. And that actually brings us to a critical synthesis in our deep dive. Let's look at what happens when the architect's dream actually becomes reality.
Okay, let's assume they win.
Yeah. Let's assume the architect is successful for a moment. They've perfectly mapped the structural holes. They've used Cialdini's psychological tools to fill the voids. They have made everyone dependent on them. What happens next?
They realize they've sprung a trap on themselves.
Precisely. If we reconcile the architect's initial success with the auditor's complex systems theory, we uncover a massive systemic vulnerability. Taleb points out that in our modern, supposedly hyper-efficient world, think of highly specialized subcontractor networks, or just-in-time global supply chains efficiency is actually just another word for fragility.
Right, because if you strip away all the redundancies to make something perfectly efficient, missing one single step in a hyper-specialized process shuts down the entire global business. We saw this with the microchip shortages a few years ago.
Yes, and it applies to human networks too. When the operator successfully fills all the structural holes, they achieve total dependency. All the information, all the approvals, all the resources flow directly through them.
They are the switcher.
They are the switcher. But by doing so, they become the single point of failure. They have centralized what should be a decentralized, resilient, complex system. If that operator stumbles, takes a sick day, gets overwhelmed, or makes a single miscalculation, the interdependencies instantly unravel. The entire network is paralyzed.
I mean, think about that indispensable middle manager who hoards all the institutional knowledge, refuses to train a deputy, and keeps all the client relationships to themselves so nobody can ever fire them.
We all know one.
They have engineered total job security. But they also can't ever take a vacation because the whole department literally collapses without them. They've engineered their own prison.
And Robert Greene talks extensively about the psychological burden this puts on the operator. As you gain more and more centralized power, you inevitably become isolated from the very network you control.
And isolation is dangerous.
It is the most dangerous state you can be in within a network. Green explicitly warns that the moment you lose contact with your people, the moment you retreat to your corner office and seek security in isolation, rebellion starts brewing in the structural holes you left behind.
Green uses the historical example of Rasputin and the Russian royal family to illustrate this, doesn't he?
He does, and it's a brilliant macro example of isolated power. Tsar Nicholas and Tsarina Alexandra were tremendously isolated from everyday Russians. They lived in a total bubble. And Rasputin, who was a mystic, used his peasant origins to insinuate himself into the court. He made himself indispensable to the Tsarina because she desperately wanted a connection to the common people, and she firmly believed he could heal her sick son.
So Rasputin filled the structural hole between the isolated royals and the concept of the Russian peasantry.
He did. But because the royals were so alienated from the actual group, the vast network of the Russian public, they were incredibly vulnerable. Alienation breeds rebellion. The network views the operator's isolation not as an efficiency, but as an insult.
They see it as arrogance.
Exactly. The operator becomes a visible target. And when the revolution came, the entire engineered hierarchy was violently dismantled.
And once the operator is caught in this trap of dependency and isolation, behavioral psychology makes it almost impossible for them to rationally escape. Daniel Kahneman discusses the concept of escalation of commitment.
This is such a common trap.
It is. The operator has invested so much time, energy, and personal ego into engineering this dependency. Even when the network starts floundering or the personal stress becomes physically unbearable, they refuse to let go of the reins.
Kahneman points out a grim reality of corporate psychology. Canceling a failing project, or in this case, relinquishing control of the network and admitting you can't manage it all, leaves a permanent stain on the executive's record. So, driven by loss aversion, they prefer the unfavorable gamble of doubling down over the sure loss of admitting defeat. They just grip the steering wheel tighter.
Kahneman also talks about competition neglect and the illusion of control. The operator sits in their office and asks, "Do we have a good plan?" without ever considering the unknown unknowns of the vast, complex network around them.
Right. They only look at what's in front of them.
Exactly. They fall victim to what Kahneman famously calls "what you see is all there is," or WYSIAD. They focus entirely on their engineered blueprint and completely ignore the chaotic, emergent wetware that is actively organizing to tear that blueprint apart.
So the operator is trapped. They are the single point of failure, they are physically, mentally exhausted, they are isolated, and they are facing a tribal network that is increasingly resentful of their top-down control.
It's a nightmare scenario.
It really is. Which raises a vital question for anyone trying to survive in a modern organization. How does an operator survive this? How do they prevent a network-wide breach where the entire system turns on them and excommunicates them?
And that brings us to the most fascinating part of this deep dive. Because if engineering dependency makes you the target, how do you protect yourself? What is the defense mechanism?
The ultimate shield is what we can call strategic silence. This concept draws heavily on Robert Greene's Law 4 from the 48 Laws of Power, which simply states, always say less than necessary.
It is such a profoundly counterintuitive law, especially today. I mean, we live in an era where everyone is constantly broadcasting their opinions on social media, Slack, and endless Zoom calls. Silence almost feels like a failure to participate.
Which is exactly why it is so overwhelmingly effective. Greene explains that most people are open books. They blurt out their opinions, they constantly reveal their plans, and they broadcast their intentions to anyone who will listen. They mistakenly think that honesty and transparency win hearts. But honesty is a blunt instrument that bloodies more than it cuts. More importantly, being unabashedly open makes you entirely predictable. And in a network, if you are predictable, your behavior can be modeled, exploited, or destroyed by rival nodes.
Greene gives this amazing historical example of King Louis XIV to demonstrate the sheer terror that silence can invoke.
Oh, this is a great story.
As a young man, Louis talked all the time. He was eager to please, but as he consolidated power, he adopted this agonizing, deliberate taciturnity. When courtiers would come to him with frantic proposals or heated arguments, he wouldn't debate them. He would just look at them and say, "I shall see."
Just, I shall see.
And then he would remain completely silent. He kept everyone terrified and off balance by simply saying nothing. Nobody knew what he wanted to hear, so they couldn't deceive him with flattery.
Think about the psychological agony of that for the courtiers. Human beings abhor a conversational vacuum. We are machines of interpretation, As the courtiers talked on and on to the silent king, desperately trying to fill the awkward void and figure out his mood, they revealed more and more about themselves.
Because they're just babbling nervously.
Exactly. They revealed their anxieties, their hidden weaknesses, their alliances, their tribal loyalties. Louis just absorbed it all. His silence wasn't a lack of communication. It was an active extraction of data. It was the absolute foundation of his power.
When you remain silent, you force others to nervously project their own insecurities onto you. Green also compares this dynamic to the oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece. Leaders would travel for weeks to consult the priestess, and she would utter just a few enigmatic, incredibly vague words.
Right.
But no one disobeyed her. The words seemed full of profound meaning simply because they were open to interpretation. People saw exactly what they wanted to see in the silence.
Now, let's map the mechanics of silence onto the network structural holes we discussed earlier. Let's say you are the operator, bridging the gap between two hostile tribes in your company, the marketing team and the engineering team. If you talk constantly, if you express firm opinions on every little issue, you will inevitably, mathematically, align yourself with the ideology of one of those tribes.
Right. If I say, we need to ship this feature faster, I'm aligning with marketing. And the very moment I do that, I become the enemy of the engineering tribe.
Exactly. You instantly close the structural hole. You are no longer the bridge. You are just a partisan soldier.
Yeah.
And you become a massive target for the Wetware's tribal aggression.
Wow.
Silence maintains the enigma. It maintains the structural hole. By suppressing your ego, much like Talleyrand did, you allow the network to project whatever they want onto you. Marketing thinks you're quietly supporting them. Engineering thinks you're quietly protecting them. You secretly gather intelligence and maintain your bridging capital without ever taking a fatal bullet.
This connects so brilliantly to Taleb's mathematical concept of ergodicity and absorbing barriers. I want to break this down because it's crucial for understanding risk in a network.
Yes, Taleb defines a situation as non-ergodic, when the probability of ruin exists. Ergodicity is a complex-sounding term, but his classic example makes it very intuitive. Let's say you are offered a chance to play Russian roulette a single time. 1 bullet, 6 chambers. If you survive, you get $10 million.
A traditional economist would say the expected value of that gamble is fantastic. You have an 83% chance of winning $10 million. You should take the bet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Taleb points out that the traditional expected value math is dangerously flawed here because it ignores the absorbing barrier. If you hit the bullet, the game ends entirely. You are dead.
Right.
You cannot play again. You cannot recover your losses over a long enough timeline. That is an absorbing barrier. When ruin is on the table, standard risk calculations go completely out the window.
And if we apply that to a social network or a corporate hierarchy, crossing the absorbing barrier means the network violently turns on you. You get fired, you get publicly canceled, or you get completely excommunicated from your industry. Your reputation is dead.
Therefore, the operator must use strategic silence to preserve their optionality. Think of every time you speak up forcefully in a polarized meeting, or every time you make a hard, irreversible commitment to a faction, as pulling the trigger in a game of social Russian roulette.
That's a terrifying way to think about meetings.
It's true, though. You might win the argument 5 times in a row, but the day you aggressively align against the wrong executive, you hit the bullet. Silence ensures you never hit that absorbing barrier of collective ruin. You survive the chaos by simply not giving the chaos a solid target to attack.
Okay, wait. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Doesn't silence have its own risks? I mean, if I sit in a meeting for 6 months and say absolutely nothing, doesn't that make me look suspicious or aloof or even just weak and incompetent? Can this backfire?
It absolutely can. And Green is smart enough to address this in what he calls the reversal of the law. Silence works brilliantly for a king. But if your social position prevents you from wrapping yourself in complete majestic mystery, like if you are a middle manager and your boss demands to know what you are doing, you have to use a different smokescreen.
And what is the opposite of silence?
Talking endlessly.
Playing the verbose fool.
Exactly. Green talks about the historical role of the court jester. The jester talks and talks, entertaining everyone, making banal jokes, playing the fool. No one suspects that the jester is actually the most observant, politically astute person in the room, sometimes much smarter than the king.
Right.
By bending your listener's ear with endless, trivial, banal talk, you distract and mesmerize them. You appear helpful, harmless, and completely unsophisticated.
You hide your intelligence behind a wall of words.
Yes. It lowers the network's defenses completely. They think you are a lightweight, And that allows you to secretly pull the strings, gather intelligence, and bridge structural holes without ever being perceived as a threat. It's the ultimate camouflage for a strategic architect operating in a hostile, cynical network.
Wow. So you either say absolutely nothing to let them project onto you, or you talk so much about absolute nonsense that people think you're harmless. Both strategies are designed to protect you from the absorbing barrier.
Oh, exactly.
Okay, let's bring this all together for the listener. How do we operate in a world that is neither purely engineerable, like the architect wants, nor purely chaotic, as the auditor fears?
Well, the synthesis of these two extreme perspectives is what Clegg and his colleagues call orchestrated emergence.
That sounds like an oxymoron. How do you orchestrate something that is emergent and unpredictable?
It does sound contradictory, but it's the reality of modern network management. The most successful network operators don't rigidly control every node. Instead, they guide the emergence. They understand that formal structures, the KPIs, the rules, the org charts must constantly co-evolve with the informal, emergent discourses of the human wetware.
So you can't just set it and forget it.
No, you can't just impose a blueprint and walk away. You have
Yeah.
to continuously adapt the network's cognitive frames to match the emergent reality on the ground. It's an ongoing, highly dynamic process of gardening rather than engineering.
So practically speaking, how does the listener listening to this right now defend themselves in this environment? How do they avoid being manipulated by an architect while surviving the tribal chaos of the auditor?
First and foremost, you have to learn to disengage the automatic pilot. Cialdini explains that because modern life is so complex, we use the principle of social proof as an automatic pilot device to navigate social situations. We look at what the crowd is doing, and we copy them. Usually this works. If everyone is running out of a building, you should probably run too. But exploiters know this, and they will purposely falsify social evidence to trigger your automatic pilot.
Cialdini uses the classic example of canned laughter on TV comedy shows for this. Even though we know intellectually that the laugh track is fake and engineered, it still triggers our wetware to laugh longer and rate the material as funnier.
We can't help it.
We are literally wired to respond to the crowd. Or look at the terrifying phenomenon of pluralistic ignorance. Cialdini tells a story about a highway patrolman who noticed a deadly pattern. If a car signals to change lanes in heavy, fast-moving traffic, 2 or 3 other cars will automatically follow it, assuming the first driver knows something they don't like, avoiding a pothole.
Right, social proof.
But the first driver was just making a random lane change.
And that blind obedience to social proof can lead to massive pileups. Cialdini compares it to the North American buffalo. The buffalo are uniquely vulnerable because they just follow the herd. Native American hunters would exploit this by getting the herd running, and the leaders would be thrust over a cliff by the sheer momentum of the followers behind them.
They just get pushed.
The rest just blindly follow the herd into the abyss.
Yeah.
Crash.
So how do we stop being the buffalo?
The defense is to actively and ruthlessly scan your environment for faked data. When you recognize that the social proof around you, whether it's fake outrage on Twitter or a forced consensus in a board meeting where nobody wants to disagree with the CEO, or an artificial laugh track when you see that has been manufactured by an exploiter, you must consciously grasp the controls and disengage the automatic pilot.
You have to wake up.
You have to look up, look around, and ask, is this real or am I being engineered?
And this connects deeply to Green's concept of developing group intelligence. You have to recognize that the moment you enter a group, you undergo a profound psychological change. You slip into primitive modes of thinking. The tribe demands conformity.
Right. And Green cautions that rebelling, just for the sake of rebelling, is equally mindless and self-destructive. We are social creatures.
Yeah.
We need the network to survive. You can't just be a contrarian all the time. That hits the absorbing barrier too.
You'll just get fired.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Green advises us to do a very delicate, highly conscious dance. You must become a gifted social actor. Outwardly, you fit in. You appease the tribal wetware, you respect the unspoken codes, you laugh at the jokes, you wear the mask of the group.
But inwardly,
Inwardly, you maintain an ironclad psychological distance. You preserve the mental sanctuary to think rationally and independently. You use empathy to understand the deep-seated emotional voids driving your colleagues, but you absolutely refuse to get swept up in their availability cascades or their cross-group hatreds. You are in the network, but not of the network.
so if you, the listener, are prepping for a massive reorganization at work next week or trying to navigate a fiercely complex industry, what is the ultimate mental model you should take away from all this?
The mental model is to view the network not as a machine to be programmed, but as a living, breathing ecosystem to be navigated. You map the structural holes to understand where power and information flow, but you respect the tribal, chaotic nature of the people occupying those holes.
Right.
You build enough dependency to make yourself valuable, but you ruthlessly avoid becoming the isolated single point of failure. And above all, you manage your own visibility. You protect your optionality by strictly controlling what you reveal, knowing that in a complex system, your words are just as likely to trigger a collapse as they are to build a bridge.
So what does this all mean? We've journeyed from the strategic architect's pristine, highly engineered circuit board to the cynical auditor's chaotic, burning chessboard. We've seen that while mapping structural holes offers immense leverage, the primal wetware of human tribalism guarantees that rigid, arrogant social engineering will end in a catastrophic Bob Rubin trade.
It always does.
The true masters of the game practice orchestrated emergence. They engineer just enough dependency to be vital, but they use the ultimate shield strategic silence, or the verbose smokescreen of the jester, to protect themselves from the absorbing barrier of a network collapse.
It requires a profound level of self-mastery, discipline, and emotional intelligence to walk that tightrope.
It really does. Which leaves us with a lingering, somewhat unsettling thought to mull over as you go about your day. If the ultimate protection against the chaotic blowback of a network is total strategic silence, then it stands to reason that the most powerful network architects in our society, the ones who are truly pulling the strings of the systems we live in, are the people whose names we have never heard and whose faces we have never seen. Look around your own networks. Who is the quietest person in the room?